In this video, we are going to talk a little bit about the role of women in the 17th century in America. So we are going to present how the role of women during the 17th century in America were represented and considered among different ethnic groups. On the one hand, in New England, for example, the Puritan settlers brought their strong religious values with them to the New World, which dictate that a woman be subordinate to her husband and dedicate herself to rearing God-fearing children to the best of her ability. As Carl Anderson says in his book Fantasyland, by global standards, Massachusetts was not an unusually oppressive place for women. Women were taught to read, so that they could learn the Bible, but few were taught to write, as it was thought there was no reason for a woman to know how to write. A colonial woman was expected to be subservient to her father until she married, at which point she became subservient to her husband. Families tended to be large, and childbearing could be dangerous prior to advancements in medicine and health care. A responsible housewife was supposed to be resourceful with her family's budget, which led to manufactured goods being a vital contribution to the success of a household. Home-manufactured goods such as dairy products and textiles were usually created by women, while the woman's husband was the owner of the goods and received whatever money they sold for. The men held traditional views and attitudes about the status and roles of women. However, women were in short supply in the colonies, so they tend to be more highly valued than the women in Europe, were still viewed as the weaker sex, lacking the physical and mental strength of men, and were emotionally less stable. Colonial women were expected to give total respect to the men and to obey them without question. Besides, ministers often told their congregations that women were inferior to men and more inclined to sin and err. The Puritans believed that the soul consists of two portions, inferior and superior. The superior is masculine and eternal, and the feminine is inferior and mortal. In addition to this, in the Puritan society, the crime of adultery was abhorred. 2 known adulterers were executed in Massachusetts Bay Colony, and others were publicly whipped. So, how in the movie and the book called The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne were presented, adulterers might have been forced to wear a scarlet A to mark their shame.
On the other hand, at least 80% of the total British and continental emigration to America were indentured servants. Indentured servants were men and women who were contracted to work for a fixed period. It was approximately from 5 to 7 years in exchange for basic needs, such as food, clothing, and lodging during their term of indenture. Colonial women who were indentured servants had few rights. They could not vote. They were not allowed to marry or even leave their houses or travel without permission. And indentured servants were not allowed to buy or sell anything. As Steve Wiggin presents in his book The U.S. History for Dummies, when Pilgrims and Puritan settlers arrived to America, they brought some slaves of the population of North America, and many of them were located in the South colonies. On top of that, European men were horrified by the hard, physical work that was undertaken by Native American women. Native Indian women were viewed as nothing more than slaves by many of the new European settlers. However, the role of the woman in Native American society was deemed equally important to that of the men, and Native American women had power such as deciding when a war should start and when a war should end. The life of women was focused on the home. The home's colonial women were invariably drafted, badly heated, had no running water, no bathrooms or indoor toilets. Lighting was dim and provided by candle and whale oil lamps. Travel was difficult as there initially were not roads. Towns were generally dirty without garbage collection and proper sewers. This led to various diseases, very few doctors, and limited medical knowledge to heal the sick. Also, as it is shown in the movie The Scarlet Letter, the woman does not have independence, so she cannot live alone. Later, during the colonial experience, as the values of the American Enlightenment were imported from Britain, the philosophies of such thinkers as John Locke weakened the view that husbands were natural rulers over their wives and replaced them with a slightly more liberal conception of marriage. However, women continued to have very few rights. They lost most control of their property in marriage, they could not divorce, and even single women could not make contracts, sue anyone, or be sued. Moreover, in the movie The Scarlet Letter, when necessary, it was the responsibility of the colonial housewife to help her husband in agriculture or artisanal endeavors. Mothers were also responsible for the spiritual and civil well-being of their children. In the colonial era, the commonly held idea was that good housewives would raise good children who would become upstanding citizens in the community. As a wife, the woman was to be obedient, faithful, and subservient to her husband. Legal status and societal norms allowed for husbands to exert power over their wives, which could result in violent circumstances. Some housewives were able to file for divorces, but these instances were not.
Nonetheless, women who were against politics and the religious beliefs imposed by men in that century were accused of witchcraft. The Salem witch trials were a series of hearings and prosecutions of people accused of witchcraft in colonial Massachusetts between February 1692 and May 1693. As Steve Wiegand explains in his book, U.S. History for Dummies, witch hunting started with 3 kids fooling around and it ended with the executions of 20 people, 14 of them women, and all but one by hanging. 12 other women had previously been executed for witchcraft in Massachusetts and Connecticut during the 17th century. The episode is one of colonial America's most notorious cases of mass hysteria. It has been used in political rhetoric and popular literature as a vivid cautionary tale about the dangers of isolationism, religious extremism, false accusations, and lapses in due process. So Catherine Howe, in her introduction to the Book of Witches, says, "Witches served as both literal and figurative scapegoats for frontier communities under profound economic, religious, and political pressure." And Kurt Andersen in Fantasyland exposes, "The play's villains, accusers, and judges are cynically and selfishly using the witchcraft panic as a pretext for exercising power." So that, more than a true fear of practice of witchcraft, it is believed today that what was tried was an attempt to get rid of unpleasant people in an environment marked by rivalry due to the distribution of lands and to neighborhood and
Salem trials, as it is shown in the movie The Crucible, when Betty Paris and her cousin Abigail Williams uttered strange sounds, crawled under furniture, and contorted themselves into peculiar positions. A doctor could not find physical evidence of any ailment, and other young women in the village began to exhibit similar behaviors. Colonists suspected witchcraft and accusation began to spread. Women were more susceptible to suspicions of witchcraft because they were perceived in Puritan society to have weaker constitutions that were more likely to be inhabited by the devil. Women healers with knowledge of herbal were particularly at risk of being accused of witchcraft because these practices could often deemed pagan by Puritans. For this reason, Arthur Miller, in his book The Crucible, assures that the world of Salem is like the microcosm where the English colonial order, mercantilism, rationalism, and Puritanism they exacerbate to an unexpected extent the submission of beings, but especially of the feminine subjects, weak by nature, prone to evil. The first three people accused and arrested for allegedly causing the afflictions were Sarah Good, a homeless beggar, Sarah Osborne, a woman who rarely attended church, and Tituba, an African or American Indian. Throughout the year, more women and some men were arrested, including citizens in good standing, and colonists began to fear that anyone could be a witch. Many of the accusers who persecuted the suspected witches had been traumatized by the American Indian Wars on the frontier and by unprecedented political and cultural changes in New England. Relying on their belief in witchcraft to help make sense of their changing world, Puritan authorities executed 20 people and accused the deaths of several others before the trials were over. In conclusion, despite the existence of different groups in the colonies of America, the role of women was always characterized by an inferiority of gender and social status where they could not do more work but only serve the male gender. In addition to this, we should recognize the fact of punishment towards the feminine manifestation on the part of the men by means of atrocious crimes known as witchcraft, only to consolidate the laws and beliefs in the 17th century.
For more information, visit our webpage The Role of Women for Dummies /Lika5.com.